That's exactly what we're doing. We talk to people and organizations and institutions that are making South Africa a much better place. And we get to do that Mondays to Fridays, 9 to 12, here on the Social Impact Show. And today, it's no different. Okay, joining me in studio now is the Group Chief Transformation and Sustainability Officer at African Bank. That is Edna Sathekga-Montse, who is, under her leadership, the bank has launched a Women Entrepreneurship Development Program. That's recently in Cape Town. We'll talk about that. They've supported sanitary drives across provinces and even helped establish community vegetable gardens where they're most needed. And of course, they are going to host the Business Summit aimed at helping small businesses for both men and women and look at funding and practical skills to grow their business. So let's get into it. Edna, good morning and thanks for joining me.
Good morning and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, it's a blue Monday, right? Because you're wearing blue. not a blue Monday for any other reason. It's an African Bank Monday. Okay, talk to us very quickly. We've seen the brand. I think not a lot of our listeners actually know how you guys view social impact, social innovation, social capital, making a change. Sometimes you just see the bank. Talk to me just from a view perspective, a vantage perspective. How do you see your role in building communities?
So actually, Sam, you've started us off quite well by noticing my outfit, and I'm going to start right there.
You should have brought us a t-shirt each.
We really are the bank that backs entrepreneurs, and so the outfit I'm wearing is actually part of our uniform at African Bank, and it was made by one of our enterprise and supply development beneficiaries.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
Not only do we develop small enterprises, but we actually also back them, and we back them by ensuring that we give them access to market. So our chosen partner is Kosi Fashion House, and so they have designed the African Bank uniform that you would see all African bankers wearing, as well as myself. And this uniform has really made it onto global stages. Earlier this year, they really modeled and showcased this uniform at Milan Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week, because we were invited there as a result of,
So
it's amazing. Our uniform.
This was on the, at Paris?
Yes, our entire collection,
what
Paris and Milan, and by invitation, as I say, because I think it was something that was so unreal and unheard of, fashionable banking.
Unusual, I've never heard that before.
Yes, fashionable banking. So we really are the organization that really backs entrepreneurs.
So I can smell the sea salt on you, right? Tell me what happened in Cape Town. I can smell you're fresh. What happened? You launched a program.
We launched the Women Entrepreneurship Development Program, and it was actually the second year in a row. So the first year was last year, and an inaugural program took place in KZN. That's where we launched. This year we launched in the Western Cape, and really this program focuses on ensuring that women entrepreneurs are really backed, are developed, right from a technical capability perspective, access to market, access to finance, and really how do you assist them to be able to move from where they are up to a higher level. So what we believe in African Bank is that at every single stage of growth in an organization, you have a similar to kind of a curve where you can kind of pick up and you can go down. So instead of just going down and remaining down, we want to make it an S-curve that progressively helps you with an upward trajectory. And so this is one of the great initiatives that we put in place to really help these women-led businesses to be able to say, how do I weather the storms and the challenges, but be able to be incubated and accelerated at different stages. We think about incubation and acceleration a lot of times only for small or micro entrepreneurs and businesses, but actually it's every single organization. If you just think around what's recently happened with the advent of artificial intelligence, with Microsoft going for ChatGPT, what did that mean for its competitors, the likes of Google and so forth, and Meta? So they then were going through their own chasm, their own curve, and they need to figure out, am I going to drop out, or am I actually going to now start an upward trajectory? So people don't always recognize that at every stage there's an opportunity for you to incubate and accelerate.
I love this idea because it's quite interesting. We're having this conversation in a year that has so much has happened, right? This has arguably been one of the most exciting, most tumultuous, most kind of for the record books, right? If you consider our relationship with America, if you consider funding, if you consider G20, national dialogue, all of these things, markers, right? We've just come out of Women's Month. There's just so much going on. I wonder how you kind of just reflect on launching such a monumental program, right? You've said it comes from KZN, you've now done the Cape Town chapter. But it can't be that as leadership you're not realizing there's just so much going on at the moment, right? And we kind of adding, if you look from a social innovation, maybe we're buying social capital to a degree here. But if you just consider the work that African Bank is doing in this year and kind of where you are placing women in this conversation, when we talk about inclusion, because it's easy for those conversations to get lost with so much happening, right?
Absolutely, and it's a monumentous year for African Bank as well. So we turned 50 this year. So really, it's our 50th anniversary.
Yeah, that kind of makes you grey and sexy, right?
It is, and seasoned, I must say.
And seasoned, salt and pepper, kind of. You've been around, right? You've been around.
We've been around, but I mean, maybe to just kind of land and situate why this year, and this was so big for us. Maybe to just kind of share a bit of background around African Bank. So we are the bank that really, during the height of apartheid, we had black women, black men who were entrepreneurs who said, we're tired of being excluded. And you speak of inclusion, that's really the birthright of African Bank. And so because of the status of the country at that point in time, they didn't decide to just give up and say, well, there's nothing we can do, there's too much happening and there's too much resistance. They met in the dusty streets of Soweto in 1964 and decided to say, we're going to start a bank. That was one of the resolutions that they came up with at NAFCOC. And then they said, you know what, it's going to be African Bank. They thought it was going to be easy. They really did. But it took over 10 years before we opened the first branch of African Bank in Garankuwa.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
It took a decade.
It took a decade, exactly. And so this is why we celebrate the 50 years, because we consider it 50 years of audacity. And that's what we want to inspire in South Africans. That's what we want to inspire in these women entrepreneurs, to say to them, we know that journey. We've traveled it ourselves. The journey to start, there's so much in terms of barriers to entry. But importantly, there's so much in terms of opportunity. There's so much in terms of inclusion. But we know that inclusion is required because of how much exclusion that there is. And so we have to be quite deliberate about thinking around how do we ensure that we figure out what do these women entrepreneurs require. You speak about our relationship even in terms of global politics and so forth. Even in, like in South Africa its own, we don't have as much access to market because some of these women entrepreneurs within their own communities are competing with established large corporates and brands who now have got a township economy strategy. And so that means that they're kind of infringing in what was their kind of market, so to speak, and they don't have the economies of scale. They don't necessarily price the way that a corporate would price and so forth. And so what does that mean, and how do we as African banks start to assist them? Because that's where the job creation is. But also to kind of shift their mindset to not focus so much on job creation, but rather income generation. Because when we focus on job creation as South Africans, we sometimes lose the fact that the informal sector as well creates a lot of income.
Massive employment.
Exactly.
Right?
And so when you then focus on the income generation, and then you say to them, how do you then through these income generating initiatives start to help people take care of themselves and their loved ones? Then you start to see people thinking differently, approaching stuff differently, and looking at inclusion as saying, but actually I can contribute to it as well as be part of inclusion.
I want to have this conversation with you from a broader perspective in terms of kind of the role players in this space, right? But on something interesting that you've mentioned, and maybe I know obviously it's leadership, you think about this often. Now, you talk about the township economy, I think of tea, right? And what Bulelani is doing with tea. I think of what Talafani Banks is doing with Spaza Eats. I think of what Gigi Alcock is doing with Casinomics, the books he's written. I think of a myriad of the banks, Yoko, Ikoka. There's so many of these programs running, right? And I think Spaza Eats, when we had a chat to them 2-3 weeks ago, they've nearly onboarded 40,000 informal businesses, right? Or that's the plan. And then obviously Heineken is running their Tavern program, and there's all these initiatives happening. Why are we still, and we know the informal economy is massive, we know it's massive. Why are we still struggling from a data perspective? Why, when we look at the macro view, we're looking over this landscape, it feels like we're not winning? And yet I can wrap off what Samm is doing with their projects, what the cement guys are doing with their programs, and the list goes on. Why does it feel like we're not winning?
So you pointed at something quite important, which is the data piece. So if you think about, us as a people, in terms of black people, we are doers.
Okay.
We do. We don't necessarily document what we do, but we are hustlers. It's almost a natural thing to us.
Yeah.
You're gonna do, but you're yourself not quite documenting what is the impact of what you
Or
are
even
doing.
following process, right?
Or following.
We don't follow process.
We get the stuff
We want
done.
to start a business, we start a business.
We start a business. You're not going to wait for something or be held back by something. Once you've decided and you've set your mind to it, you're a doer.
Yes.
And so in doing, we've then realized that we've made impact, but we can't necessarily evidence that impact.
Yeah.
And so when partners and other role players come into play and they say, we want to see the data isn't always available. So you are now finding more of us actually gathering the data and working and collaborating. So some of the organizations that you've mentioned have actually also collaborated with African Bank as well. And so they've also started to collaborate together as well. So we're creating this ecosystem of role players that are not necessarily in competition with one another, but realizing that we are all driving the same outcome. We want inclusion. We want progress. We want to see people uplift their lives. We are not so good at documenting, but most definitely we're getting better at it. We've really had some great work. For example, this year we launched the FinFind and African Bank report that really looked at thousands and thousands of micro, small and medium enterprises and how their access or lack of access to financing is impeding their growth, but also that we started to realize through this data that the entities that make less than R1 million, majority of them are actually not getting that access to finance. The very same access to finance, by the way, that we seek to provide. But it's because they are almost kind of assessed in the same way
as
that
big
you
business.
assess as big business.
Which makes no sense.
But when you don't gather the data, you don't quite see the magnitude of how that happens. You just hear anecdotally a story of someone who has declined credit here or there and so forth, but you don't see that this is actually quite big. This is actually something that's quite prevalent. And so with us doing research as African Bank, as I say, together with ecosystem players, we're starting to now be able to get rich data that allows us to now say, how do we solution differently? What is it that we're solving for? And how do we ensure that we walk the journey with those customers?
You know what's interesting? So this show, we specifically focus on CSR, shared value, social innovation, social capital, and ESG, right? And I remember, this was a couple of years ago, I walked into African Bank and I went to go and meet with, I think his name was Kennedy. I can't remember his surname now.
Dembe, maybe.
Yes. And it was mind-blowing to me how African Bank, this was just my conversation with him, and subsequently I've seen other social impact stuff. It was mind-blowing to me how passionate African Bank was about kind of the role it wanted to play in communities, and how for the longest time, which is so weird, until I had that meeting, I was not aware, and I think this conversation is going to shock a lot of people this morning, to know how involved African Bank is in building not just, women businesses, leading summits, putting reports, sanitary drives, communal food gardens. The bank really feels to me like it has a sense of what's happening in the community, but it's kind of kept it a really amazing secret, right? Because you know what kind of Absa does, Nedbank with the affinity program, what the other guys do. And I just wonder, maybe it's just the idea of rolling up one sleeve and doing the work and not talking about it. But we now know that conscious consumerism is a thing. Consumers need to know that brands care, or else it's kind of for naught, right?
Yeah, no, spot on. And this is by virtue of the conversation we just had around we are doers, right? If you think about the people who started the bank.
I was shocked when I went to African Bank, just how much involved you are in the community.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think about the people who started the bank, they were doers. They didn't quite think around the process, the marketing, the advertising and so forth of the good work that they're doing. But you're absolutely correct. As consumers, we're becoming a lot more conscious about our buying decisions and the impact of our buying. Exactly, and the impact of that buying power. So we are doing so much in communities.
No, you do.
We really
I want
do.
people to go to your website and just realize, I think it will blow people away if they know how much African Bank actually does.
Yeah.
In comparison to what's in the public space.
No, we appreciate that, Sam. Thank you so much for recognizing it. And we want to do more. We really are so happy with the initiatives that we do. African bankers themselves are volunteers. We set a target target, for example, to say in a 5-year period, we were going to achieve 20,000 hours of employee volunteerism.
Oh, wow.
We knocked that out of
So you work with
park.
For Good organizations
Yes,
like For Good,
exactly.
yeah. I love the guys at For Good.
Exactly, and For Good, when we speak about data, For Good is really quite beneficial for us,
And
because
the-
they help us to track all the work that we
She
do.
and the team, they're really, really good. I
Yes,
love
and
it.
before we were doing the work,
Yeah.
but we
Over
couldn't really track
20,000
it.
hours a
Over
year.
20,000 hours
Wow.
over the 5-year period.
Over
But
the 5 year,
yes, exactly. And we hit it out of the goalposts long time ago, but we weren't able to really track. And so when we started working with the For Good platform, then we're able to really start tracking what our employees volunteering in, what are the initiatives, the hours that we've given back, and so forth. So we've really done quite well. Some of the initiatives that we've done, for example, we pride ourselves in going to rural and peri-urban communities and really focusing on education. So education is quite important for us.
Yeah.
And not education for the sake of education, but quality education.
Would you list that, Edna, as one of your flagships?
Yes.
Education?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay.
Education is a key flagship for us. And as I say, it's quality education. So we link both the socio-economic development together with the sustainable development. So what we've done, we really started with looking at, if you think around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, and thinking about the bare basics. So we understand that, of course, there's, you know, we're talking about fourth industrial revolution, we're talking about AI and so forth. But I want to tell you, Sam, if you don't have a roof over your head while you're trying to learn,
None of that matters.
None of that matters. And so we started with the basics of really the infrastructure. But we didn't just say we're going to just do infrastructure and just build. We chose an implementation partner, which is called Adopt a School Foundation, who really will be able to identify with what our ethos, our philosophy, but importantly the values of African Bank. And what we wanted to do, Sam, was to say we're going into those areas and those schools that are really referred to as quintile 1 schools.
Yeah.
So, and this is the lowest in terms of, you know, there are no fee paying schools, so no school fees required. They are usually on in fact they're always on a feeding scheme. They're in a rural or township area, but importantly the area that they're in is also an area that is recognized by government as a high poverty area. And so we've built schools, so this is the likes of Ngamakwe in the Eastern Cape. You know, the first time we went for a visit there, you know, when we were coming down the mountain, we got a tire puncture from the sharp rocks, you know. And my coming from rural Limpopo, our rocks are not as sharp. Yes, it's gravel, but it's not. So that was quite an interesting thing for us to be stuck on the side of the road, and the cars are not moving so frequently because there are no cars. So you really, it gives you a view. We've got,
sense.
you know, people, we're talking about now children
Which is weird,
who,
some South Africans will never know. And of course, it's not a
Exactly.
blight against them or a slight against them. It's just you will never know what poverty looks like if you don't climb in a car and you go and visit. But I always say this. I spent a year on the road traveling with a client, and we went to every province. But I will tell you this much. Even in the communities where it looks like it's abject poverty, people are respectful, filled with dignity, filled with hope for their children, and they are, in my honest opinion, living South Africa's gees, that spirit, because it doesn't matter where they come from. And that's the thing that struck me, just how amazing the country is and how diverse it is. But hope is a unilateral feeling that everybody has. They all want the best for their children.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why, as African Bank, whenever we're going to a community and we're saying we're going to have a social impact initiative, we always ask for permission. So one thinks
Very
about,
important.
one thinks
Very
about
important.
the work that we do, and they think charity, and they think to themselves, well, the school didn't have classrooms, so they should be grateful that you bring them classrooms. No.
And communities are very vocal when you bring in social impact projects that doesn't align with their needs. And I think, but this is the thing that I always say, and if you listen to this show, I mean, every day, it's easy to build a rocket ship. It's incredibly difficult to change someone's life, right?
Yeah.
Because, and I don't think people appreciate, gone are the days where corporates rock up with, we've got a solution. The amount of stakeholder engagement, the amount of, because you want the community to make sure the project is looked after you leave. And the only way they can do that is if they feel valued and respected and part of the conversation. So a lot of corporates spend a fair amount of time just on that, and that can be painful sometimes.
Exactly, and with our whole school development project, as an example, Sam, we were very clear, even with the community, to say, firstly, we ask the school, we ask the school's governing body, we ask if there's a traditional leadership in place, then we ask the traditional leaders, the chief, and so forth. But we really make sure that we do really thorough stakeholder
Due
engagement.
diligence, yeah.
But not only that, because of exactly what you've mentioned about the fact that when you then exit and you've concluded the project,
Because there has to be an exit.
there has to be an
It's
exit.
not a bottomless pit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also importantly, who's going to take care of it? And so what's unique about the African Bank Whole School Development Program is that the people who actually build the schools are the community members themselves. So we're very clear
Yeah.
on that. So the employment is created for the parents of those children because they themselves are unemployed.
I love that.
You
I
are
think that's so
creating, you're creating employment for the community members,
Yeah.
the school governing bodies, but we are very clear also on saying it must be gender equal. So we
Okay.
don't want a situation where we're saying because someone is doing the plumbing, it has to be a male. We're
Yeah.
very deliberate on that. So you have parents who are doing
Yeah.
the tiling, the bricklaying, and we don't just say we'll throw it at you and we'll see how you go. Because
See,
this is for
I
school
love
children,
that,
right?
Edna. I love that. Because you know what it is. And this, yet again, not a slight against anybody. But if you have to think about, if you're coming into a project, how many people are able to benefit off it? And I think that is where social impact has become super smart. In the olden days, it was just about, we'll come in, we build infrastructure. But the idea is, who are the suppliers? Who's even the
Yes.
person providing the lunch?
Yes.
And so there's empowerment that runs from the moment you think about the project to the moment you exit. And I think that's where you guys have become super smart.
Absolutely, even right to the cleanup crew, as you say. But we also do a skills transfer. So
Yeah.
because remember, these are schools that we built for durability as well, but also for safety, because it's young children, young people's lives. So we have to make sure that it meets the standard of the Department of Basic Education.
And uses latest technology, by the way, because
Yes.
you want to be able to build it as quick as possible, as durable as possible. So using some
Exactly.
of the latest technologies, some of the best practices in the world at the moment to build those
Including
schools.
ESG.
Yeah.
Including ESG.
We
So
haven't even talked about ESG. and your
so
footprint.
really, so really, Sam, we've created so many temporary jobs. We've touched so many lives. But importantly for us was to say we must have a sense of ownership by these communities who we leave with these infrastructure projects, but also the MSMEs. You know, you would take it for granted to say, where do you buy your material? Like you say, who's serving the lunch? Who's doing the
Very
PPE?
important.
And so forth. And so we're very deliberate in making sure that the entire value chain includes the community members, and as much as possible, of course, we make sure that there's a skills transfer. So we have trained engineers and so forth who are there on site who would say, you know, CC, the way you've laid this brick is not quite it. The way you've done the electrification is not quite it. This is how you need to do. Because once we've then exited, and let's say, you know, there is a burst pipe, they need to be able to say, you know, it was so-and-so's mother. Let's call upon them so that they can help us with the maintenance thereof. And so that really gives that sense of ownership, but gives them a skill that they can be able to use also within the community.
I like that. It puts a smile on my face. We get to do many of these. I mean, and it always blows my mind how people just think about problem solving. You've got a event coming up. In your final couple of 2 minutes, I want to talk about that. It's the business summit, right? Okay, talk to me a little bit about that.
So we've got the KZN investment conference that's
Yes.
coming up. It's going to be held in KZN in October. We'll provide those dates so that you could be able to share it with your viewership. And the reason why we really look at investment conference and why it's so important for us to be involved in initiatives of this nature is because we understand that finance really, and financing and investment is the backbone of an economy. It unlocks so many opportunities. And as we shared earlier on, is that at different stages, every single organization requires the opportunity to be able to have that upward trajectory when you're thinking about the growth curve that they're on. And so investment can be able to unlock opportunities, whether locally or even internationally. So when I think about even some of our enterprise and supply development beneficiaries, we've really taken them even overseas. So for example, we sponsored some to be able to go with us to the United Kingdom for the South Africa UK investment week.
Yes, I remember.
And so yes, exactly. And so we've also had some who went to Algeria. So we really are looking at saying, how do we invest and unlock opportunities, both in access to market and access to finance? So investment conferences of this nature provide us with an opportunity to be able to showcase what African Bank can do, but importantly, provide people to see the opportunity to see African Bank as a partner in the growth of their business.
Yeah. And then Edna, as we wrap up, I mean, I can have a 3-hour conversation with you about the work that you guys do. But in terms of what is in 2025, what does transformation mean now? Because I think it feels like it's gone through many iterations, right? Depending on where we are. how does African Bank see transformation now? Because I think obviously we've loosely touched on the word inclusion, inclusivity, all of that kind of stuff. But what is the mandate now as the leader? What do you see as transformation in 2025? What is it?
I'm going to answer that by sharing a short story.
Yeah.
A lot of youth development programs are in place across the country. A lot of opportunities are available, but available opportunities are not always accessible. With African Bank, our youth development program, we understand that as a young person who is matriculated, you don't have to have a degree to be able to participate for us, but you might every single day be waking up to make amagwinya, sell amagwinya, so that you have something to be able to take home at the end of the day, to be able to feed a child that you perhaps had as a teenage pregnancy, or to be able to help a grandparent or other parent or caregiver at home. What does that mean when we then say to you as African Bank, we've got a youth development program and sign up? That means that if we don't allow you an opportunity to be able to truly access it, then you have to make a tough decision. So in your first month, Sam, what happens when you are an intern is that you would have to go and borrow money for you to be able to get to work from home. You would have to borrow money perhaps for clothing and so forth, and that really has got an impact in your ability to be able to continue with that program right up until the end of the month. True transformation for us at African Bank meant that instead of being able to say, because the law requires only that you have interns for a 12-month period or so forth, we actually give you 13 payments. The first payment comes the first week after you've signed your contract. You immediately get your first salary. It's not an advance. We don't expect it back. But we're very clear about what it's for. We tell you this is what the money is for. The first part, you're going to buy groceries so that you're not worried about what anybody at home is eating, and you can be able to carry a lunchbox. The second part, you're going to buy a smartphone device. We've got many providers, and we give them examples from $600 to $900. You're able to get a smartphone for WhatsApp. Why do we need WhatsApp? Because we've got so much happening in Teams and so forth on WhatsApp, so you need a data smartphone. The third thing, you go to one of the retail stores and you'll be able to purchase outfits that you can be able to mix and match to be able to allow you to come into the workplace with confidence. The fourth thing, we know that transport is an issue, so we give you these funds so that you can be able to see yourself move from home to work without borrowing money from the local mashonisa or from anybody, and so that's transport. The fifth one is to really say, just in case you want to spoil yourself for having done good after 2 weeks in our program, you can be able to buy yourself a little something at the canteen or a little something in whatever restaurant you wanted to get. At the end of that first month, though, you still get your full salary. So you would have gotten 2 paychecks in 1 month. That is true access. That's true transformation, because we're not making it available. We're making it truly accessible. That is true inclusion for African Bank.
Edna, I love it. That is amazing. What a great way to start a Monday. I'm sure lots of people are driving around with a smile on their face. That's absolutely amazing. And now, if you didn't know, now you know. That's Edna Sathekga-Montse, who's the Group Chief Transformation and Sustainability Officer at African Bank, talking to us about what the bank is all about, talking to us how they see their role that they play within communities, how they provide legitimate access. We didn't even talk about social inclusion. We didn't talk about social capital. We didn't talk about how do you build these things. We didn't talk about any of the ESG programs. This was just a conversation to find out a little bit about African Bank. We've seen the brand, and now here's the thing. Now that you know what the brand is about, you can't ignore what the brand's about. Okay, we've literally a minute away from our news. We've got General Ria Piega on the show a little bit later talking to us how do we build a safer South Africa.